This is the How to Write Funny podcast. I'm Scott Dickers. Today I'm with Caitlin Kunkel, who is a comedy writer, teacher, and founder of the Belladonna, and author of the new book, New Erotica for Feminists. Caitlin, tell us what you're doing in comedy right now.
So right now I actually have had a lot of things happen in the last year and a half or so. I had my first piece published in the New Yorker. I started a website called the Belladonna Comedy with 3 other women and editors, and I am about to have my first book come out. So a lot of stuff happened in the last year and a half that I probably couldn't even have imagined happening 2 years ago.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I kind of had all these goals starting in 2017 that I wanted to hit. Number one being get into the New Yorker, and that happened in January.
Fantastic.
So I was like, oh, great, check that off.
So what was that piece?
That was called Backstories You're Better Off Not Knowing. And it was actually a piece I had written for a radio show I write for in Portland, Oregon, that they hadn't used because of time. And it sat on my computer for a year and a half, and I went back and read it, and the general conceit is that there are just some things you don't want to know about. You don't want to know what your doctor did before he operated on you. You don't want to know what happened to that piece of meat before you ate it at the restaurant.
Right.
So it was these little vignettes about things, just don't worry about what happened before you got there.
Awesome. Tell us about the process of submitting to Shouts and Murmurs. Do you know the people? Is it out of the blue? How does that work?
So I think a lot of people want, that's like a big holy grail publication.
Absolutely.
And it feels very shrouded in mystery, even though I think the editor, Emma Allen, has kind of gone out of her way to not make it so. The details are on the website. You can submit to, there's an email address they have. They're very clear on the formatting, and they do read the whole slush pile. She's done interviews where she says, at any given point, there might be 600 pieces in the slush pile, but she does read through them. And if you know her or know someone else who has submitted and they give you her email address, you can submit directly to her, which is what ended up happening to me. A former student of mine had submitted, and she saw I had put in my newsletter that I wanted to submit this year and get on, and she sent me Emma Allen's email address, so I sent it directly to her.
Got it. That happened in January, and then when did you found the Belladonna website?
In February, so the very next month.
But that was obviously a project in the works, so how long did that take? And what was the genesis of that idea?
So in the latter half of 2016, obviously the lead up to the election is going on, and there are these Facebook groups for female writers, and one of the things that came up a lot was that there were a lot of good pieces, but there just weren't a ton of homes for them. So if something got rejected by the New Yorker, rejected by McSweeney's, people weren't necessarily sure what to do with them because it didn't seem like there were a lot of sites that took broad overall humor pieces. So one woman, Carrie Whitmer, posted in the Facebook group that she wanted to start a website that would take female and female identified writers, their comedic work, and said, who wants to do it with me? And I responded, another woman, Fiona Taylor, responded, and then I brought in Brooke Preston, who's the 4th editor, and that was that.
Did you know anything about the experience of these other women who were starting this website?
I did not. I had read some of Carrie's work online, and I knew she was a much more absurd writer than I was, so that felt like a fit just in terms of having different voices. I didn't know anything about Fiona at the time. And then Brooke, I had actually met years ago in Portland, Oregon, when we both lived there, and I had taught her in a sketch class literally days before she had her first child. So the last time I had seen Brooke, she actually missed the final class to go into labor. But since then, she had taken, I teach online for Second City in the satire classes, and she had taken those classes. So I knew she was back writing. She lives in Columbus, Ohio, and that she was an excellent writer. So I thought she'd be someone who would have an interest in doing something that could be done remotely, not in New York.
Great. And was there anybody on the team who knew how to make websites and stuff, or just writers and editors?
Mainly just writers and editors. We had some experience with marketing and content strategy, but my experience is in teaching and mostly just writing and editing. Carrie is a business journalist for Business Insider. She does entertainment reporting. But no, that was one of the reasons we used Medium, because we didn't want to have to build out a whole website while also trying to set up the processes and the writing and submissions. So it just seemed easier to use an already built platform for that.
Yeah, got it. All right. So there was the piece in the New Yorker. There was the Belladonna comedy website. And what was the third thing you said? You had another big thing happen that year. That was the goal.
So that the next thing actually came this year in 2018.
Oh, okay.
We, the 4 editors, we wrote a piece called New Erotica for Feminists that we published in McSweeney's in early February after it was rejected by the New Yorker.
Which is a great piece.
Thank you. And it actually ended up being good because the piece went viral and it was shared 100,000 times just on Facebook within a few weeks. And we got contacted by a publisher in the UK.
Did the New Yorker editor come crying to you about how she missed the boat on that one?
No, we were wondering if she saw it, but at the end, the New Yorker, because they do pay you, would have owned it. So
that's
it ended up being
good news for
kind
you.
of good that we took no money at first.
Yeah. Not that you planned it, but what a great business strategy.
Yep.
That now you can leverage it. And so, yeah, finish that story. What happened then with the
we had
UK publisher?
A wonderful woman named Juliet Brooke from the UK from a publishing company called Scepter reach out to us several days after it went up and just said she loved it and had we thought about making it into a book. And at that point, we had considered it, but in the way you kind of were like, oh, that would be cool. And within 2 days, they had made us an offer, and we had to immediately get a literary agent, which we did that weekend. And then next...
If I might interrupt,
yeah.
The best way to get an agent is when you have a book deal.
Yes.
Always wait till then.
We had 3 agents we spoke to very quickly.
Yeah, of course. They're all really excited.
Yeah, and the woman we ended up going with, who actually a former guest on your show, Sarah Cooper, introduced us to very graciously, was actually on vacation with her child in Epcot and still made the time to talk to us about
That's
it.
Great.
And then we got the agent, and she helped us both negotiate a higher advance for the UK deal, and then she had us put together a proposal. And within a month, we had finished a 40-page proposal with new material and all stats on the piece and ourselves and our platform. And then that went out to about 20 U.S. publishers, and about 10 had interest. And we ended up getting a bid from a U.S. house. That's
fantastic. And if you're comfortable talking about it, would love to know what the deal looks like.
It's since there's 4 of us, I don't know that I'm authorized to share exact numbers.
Oh,
but
fair enough.
In the UK, we ended up getting a mid 5-figure deal, which I guess in the UK is a good deal, we were told.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty good.
And then we ended up getting a 6-figure deal in the US.
Fantastic.
So there are 4 of us, and we have to pay our agent. And as we say, it's not quit your money, not quit your job money.
It really is not.
It's
but it's nice.
It is nice. It's maybe pay off the rest of my student loans this year money.
Yeah. And maybe you can cut back if you have a day job that you can cut back on or whatever. Obviously you need the time to write.
Exactly.
So they're paying you for your time, but I always tell people don't get excited thinking you're going to move into a Stephen King mansion.
Yeah.
You basically, if you break down the hours, it's maybe you're getting $20 an hour or something like that for the work. So it's still honest work.
Definitely.
But it's a great start, and congratulations. It's awesome.
Thank you. And it's still you're so used in humor and satire and comedy writing to making no money. So when you get an email that has a 6-figure number in it, it feels like a ton of money until you do that math.
Absolutely. And not only no money, but oftentimes you get started in doing comedy, you're paying money.
Yes.
You're paying for classes or you're paying for access or whatever. So it's a nice transition to make.
Very nice.
So all these great things happen to you in a very short space, but I wouldn't want to give anybody the impression that they could just walk out their door tomorrow and make all these things happen. You've been working at this for years, and that's always the way it is. It's always the overnight success comes after years, sometimes decades of work. So
very true.
How did you get to the point where all these things are suddenly happening for you? Where did it begin?
I've studied writing for a long time, but I've kind of taken a very circuitous route to where I am now. I knew when I was a little kid that I wanted to publish a book, but I certainly would not have thought it would be satirical erotica. And if I'd known that as a child, that would have been weird. But it's...
and just to be clear, it's not erotica. It's satire. It's not
it's
sexy
satire.
at all. It's just funny.
It's you think they're erotic scenarios, so there's that parody element. One of the first ones we wrote was my boss calls me into his office and shuts the door. He promotes me again and again. I'm in ecstasy. So they combine an element of what you think is going to be sexual, but it's actually something about society and gender roles.
Yeah, and just empowering you and making you feel validated.
Yes.
I just want to make that clear. Yeah, so you didn't think you'd necessarily be doing that.
No, but I would say the hallmark of my career has been kind of leap and the net will appear. I don't have I'm not one of those people who has really clear goals, like I will write a humor book by this date and time, or I will perform on this main stage. And I went to college. I went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, where pretty much everyone became a doctor. So I'm at the age now where the people I went to college with like are actually doctors. They're surgeons.
Wow.
And it's been hard at times to just take a very roundabout route to finding some success.
Yeah, because they sort of pity you for like not being a doctor or for doing something weird or whatever, right?
It seems fun and quirky, but yeah, I don't think any of the pediatric neurosurgeons feel too bad for me.
They're like, when are you going to give up this
yeah
fun side thing that you're doing?
What else do you do is another question.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So then how did you start? How did you start getting into comedy?
I studied writing undergrad. I studied, it's called writing seminars at Johns Hopkins. It's this interesting major where you do learn different types of writing, like research writing and science writing and memoir, biography, journalism, but then you take classes in history and science and philosophy, like all the things that writing should be informed by. So it was just this great liberal arts education. I got to try out screenwriting and playwriting and journalism, opinion writing, and I got a great writing education, but then I finished college and didn't know what to do from there. So a dean at my school had said, why don't you apply to this program? It's called a Fulbright English Teaching Assistant. So there are Fulbright scholars who go places and like do research, and then there are Fulbright English teaching assistants who go to like less traditional countries and you teach English in a high school or a middle school. So I ended up going to Indonesia for a year, and I taught at a Muslim high school for a year.
Wow. Yeah, you hear stories of everybody always goes to Japan.
Yes, because JET is a great program.
Is that the deal? Okay.
Yeah,
it's a different
and
program.
that pays well. And people go to China a lot. South Korea is a huge English teaching market. But yeah, Indonesia didn't have a ton of teachers at that time. I think they had 20 of us come and they got like 28 applications. So
wow. So how was that?
It was very interesting.
Did you go by yourself?
You go with a group of 20, but then you're all assigned to different schools. So you're kind of spread out over the whole nation.
And you just get like a place to live and you're on your own.
Yeah, you get 6 weeks of training in how to speak Indonesian and how to teach. And then I got flown out to a city called Malang in East Java, and that was that. And I worked in a high school, and I had 450 students I taught every week.
That is outrageous.
And I was 20. I had just turned 22 the week before I left, so.
Well, at least you're too young to know how impossible that is.
Yes, when I heard the classes were 45 students, I was like, wow, that seems legit. So.
Wow.
So,
but that like crash course in Indonesian like couldn't have possibly helped, could it? Or did you make use of that?
The interesting thing about Indonesian as a language is it was created after World War II because they had been a colony of the Dutch, and then they had been taken over by Japan, and they all spoke regional dialects. So after World War II, they hired linguists to create like a really simple language so everyone could learn it. So it was actually feasible to learn Indonesian.
So you could teach in their language.
We
were teaching them English.
We would teach in English, but like day to day, very few people spoke English. So I had to speak Indonesian to like pay my bills and get food and transit around in the little buses they had there. So it was definitely a trip. And I feel like that's when I learned to teach really, because I had so few tools at my disposal. There was no AV component for anything. They didn't have, they had books, but they were quite inaccurate. Like I always remember one of them, the fact they had about George W. Bush was George W. Bush was a cheerleader in college. And that was like the #1 George Bush fact.
That's his biography.
Yeah, in Indonesia.
Wow.
So there wasn't a ton of literature to work with. So you kind of had to make your own lesson plans up.
Wow. So you do that, and that's got to be life-changing. And then you come back, but you now have this skill. You're a teacher.
Yes. And I used to be very afraid of public speaking, but at that point it was like, I've taught so many students. I've made such a fool of myself. When you don't speak the language of a country and every day you make thousands of mistakes.
And you're getting laughed at.
People laughed at me all the time. And
so you went through the crucible. That every performer has to go through that crucible of bombing.
Yes.
And it was built into your teacher training.
It was very much
how handy.
Tied in. I remember the first day I was there, they had like this big rally and all the students were there, and they kept saying, do something funny, do something funny. And I was like, I don't know what they want. So I like walked on my hands for a little bit, which they were all screaming at.
That's impressive.
Yeah, afterward, I was very flexible at that time. Afterwards, they were like, oh, we just meant tell a joke, but what you did was so much better, and it's exactly what we thought an American would do. And I was like, oh,
awesome.
God.
Yeah, so you come out of that, you've got not only the skills of learning how to write that you got in college, but the skill of teaching that you learned in Indonesia. So you have those two things. So what do you do when you get back to the States?
I applied to grad school when I was abroad because, again, still didn't have like a real plan. And so I ended up going to what was at that time a very new program at Northwestern called an MFA in writing for the screen and stage. So when I went in, it was only the second year, so they hadn't even graduated anyone yet. And I was very young to be in graduate school. I was only 23, which in retrospect was probably too young. But it was interesting because the program wasn't shaped yet. So we would learn playwriting, screenwriting, production skills, audio editing, video editing. And they were still able to let people kind of have latitude in terms of what they would and wouldn't take. So I would take like classes called like Clint Eastwood in religion, and it was great. Very expensive, but great.
What's that, a 2-year program?
2-year program. I finished in 2009.
Okay. Are you starting to get an inkling of like a dream to like do anything in comedy at this point? Or are you just really focused on learning how to write and expanding your skills in terms of writing?
Well, all during grad school, I did drama, like hardcore drama, the most dramatic dramas you can think of. And I spent all this time working on them. And then pretty much the second I finished, it was literally the next month, I was like, I think I want to do comedy. So I immediately went to Second City, and Northwestern had given us a grant at the end of our time there, and you could do whatever you wanted with it. So I spent all of it on taking the entire sketch program there, which is a year long.
Okay.
And I felt like drama hadn't done it for me, but I had heard comedy described as like a way of hitting people with the same point, but like kind of from the side instead of the front. So I was like, that sounds good.
And the sketch program is mostly a writing program. Did you do any improv or just the sketch writing?
No, I was still too timid at that point to do improv, but I did the sketch program, which is a year long. And then the last 4 months, you produce a show, do pre-production, and then you actually like produce the show during a whole run, and it runs
like
for a month.
A review or whatever.
A sketch review.
For those who don't know, Second City Review, it's a format and it's an hour, right?
Yeah, about an hour. And then, so you write sketches that everyone from the class has to have one in, but you kind of try to weave them together.
Right.
You have blackouts, you have repeating characters. So you try to create a world for an hour.
Right. So you did that, and you're really investing in your skills as a writer, obviously. You've already put, just adding up the times that you've talked about, like 4-5 years into just learning how to write. So you've got to be really good at that point.
I will say I'm a very slow learner.
Okay.
But once I learned, like it took me fully, there are 6 levels of sketch at Second City. I did not write a good sketch until level 4. So if I hadn't prepaid for them, I'm sure I would have been like, wow, I don't get this. But I will say once I learn a skill, I can get very good at it. It just takes, I know that about myself now, that I'm going to be really bad much longer than other people. But if I can get over that point, I can get good.
I'm the exact same way.
Oh, really?
I don't run into a lot of people like that. Most people are either fast learners or they get impatient and give up. Like almost nobody that I've met has the tenacity to know they're a slow learner, to know they're going to be miserable at it, but stick with it anyway because they really want to do it. So that takes a special kind of hammer-headedness, I guess, to really stick with that.
And I don't know. I think some of it is because growing up I was a distance swimmer, and so I just spent like tons of time training. I trained 6 hours a day, and just like I was not good for years and years and years, but then I did see like a big improvement toward the end of high school, and I was like, oh, I guess you just train for 8 years and then you're good for 2. That's how it works.
Well, it's kind of like that principle we were talking about before, where it seems like an overnight success, but really you've been putting in a lot of hours. So many things work that way.
Yeah.
Where you seem like you're just treading water, literally in your case, but you're not. You're actually gaining skill, even though it feels like maybe you've plateaued or you've learned all you can. And then mysteriously these quantum leaps will happen where you'll just suddenly be like, oh my God, I'm great at this now.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times I see with my students all the time too. So I'm grateful I can speak to this to them. But it's the students who are the best sometimes who then have like such a prolonged period of not seeming to get any better because they're trying harder things, more complex forms or points of view, and their work just sucks. It's not clear anymore. But if they stick with it, then they'll just level up. And that's when they'll get into the New Yorker or they'll get their first McSweeney's publication. But yeah, that's when a lot of people quit too.
Yeah, absolutely. And people who are good often aren't accustomed to having to try.
Yes.
So it takes a special combination of traits.
Yeah.
For somebody to really stick with it when they know they're good.
Yeah.
knowing that there's going to be a further benefit down the road.
And it is, and that's part of why I'm glad I went to Johns Hopkins too. Like, I was pretty smart in high school, but I got there and I was not smart. And so that was a very eye-opening experience to me.
Was it just the caliber of the people in the program with you?
Yeah, just people who were just like unbelievably smart, but also incredibly hard workers. So even people who weren't naturally the most intelligent people would work so hard to get an A that it was frightening. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess that's how we do it here.
How do you get through something like that? A lot of people would be intimidated and would give up, or would just have a hard time motivating themselves if they saw just how difficult the competition was. You seem to have a very, oh, well, this is how it is attitude about it. And I think people want to know, like, how do I get that attitude? How do you do that? How do you manage the emotion of feeling overwhelmed?
I think part of it is being a studier, and not even just like studying in school. Just when I see something that I think is very good, I want to know how it works. So I kind of try to take it apart to its different elements. So if I read a piece I thought was really good, I would be like, well, their language is better than mine, so I need to work on my language. Or this is just a better idea, so I need to try to have better ideas. So rather than like just read a piece and be like, that's amazing, can't be that good, I would be like, well, which parts are better than I am? And I'll work on that part now.
Awesome. Yeah, you take the emotion out of it and think of it as like you're just putting together a recipe.
Exactly. And it's like you can't get good at everything all at once, but you can get better at your titles.
Absolutely.
And that makes a huge difference.
Huge difference. Yeah, another thing, I don't know if you've thought of this too, but what's helped me is knowing just how valuable failure is.
Yes.
And how you learn so much more from failure than you'll ever learn from success. And to just allow yourself to fail a lot, and just knowing that you're banking those failures and they're going to help you ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I do think swimming is part of that, because you just race all the time and lose constantly.
Is that right?
Yeah, especially, and I would race the mile in college, and it's like, it's a grueling race and just lose. And, and I would race so much in high school and lose. And even when I would win a lot too, but you just can't win all the time. So that was just kind of ingrained in my mindset that like, okay, well, they were this much faster, so I have to get that much faster to beat them. So.
Yeah, the stupid cliche about winning isn't everything. You have to have fun.
Yeah.
These truisms that you hear growing up are so true. Like
They
you have to have fun swimming. You have to enjoy swimming and not worry about winning or losing, because
Yeah.
you're going to lose sometimes, and it's tough. I feel like people are born with the idea that winning is the best thing.
Yeah, and it obviously does feel good sometimes, but there's also been times when I would lose at a meet, but I would swim my best time ever.
Right.
And it would feel amazing. And no, I was last. But, there's like personal victories, and then there's like overall victories that the world looks at and thinks they're amazing.
And the funny thing for me is, I don't know if this is the case with you, but I like winning also. Like, I want to win.
Yes, I like to win.
But I know that when I lose, that's just part of the process of getting to winning. Like, I'm still confident that, I'm going to win in the end.
Yes. Yeah.
So really, it is all about winning for me, is what I'm saying. But I just understand that losing is part of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's almost like a childlike mentality. I think you're going to win all the time your whole life. Maybe some people do think that. But
yeah, that's absurd, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I'm enough of a pessimist and a cynic to be like, well, who would win all the time? That's crazy. So yeah, it's definitely like I feel depressed when I get rejected, but I always have an element. I never, and I don't know why I'm like this, but I've never sat down and been like, well, the editor's just an idiot for not liking that. I've always thought like, what could have been the reason for this, and how can I make it better next time?
Yeah, and you've never sent like angry, drunken emails back to editors saying, why didn't you like my thing?
No.
So let's take you back now. So you've built all these skills to write. So you're getting really good at writing, and you come out of this program at Northwestern, you take the Second City sketch class. Mm-hmm. Where do you go from there? Do you have goals at this point yet? Or are you still just moving where the winds take you at that point?
At that point, I knew I wanted to do more Second City style sketch reviews, because I had really enjoyed that. So I took a day job in fundraising at the Goodman Theater in Chicago. And my mother said something to me growing up, like, no job is a wasted skill. And I feel like that job is where I learned how to like be a organized professional. like sending emails, meeting deadlines,
That's a good skill.
just making sure that I was good at delivering information in a clear way in memos. So I was doing that during the day, but then on my lunch break every day, I had a little tiny computer, and I would go sit like in the mezzanine at the theater and write for an hour every day. And that
What did you write?
I wrote sketches, but then I also started this like little blog just called Caitlin's Characters, which is kind of cutesy.
How cute.
Yes. And I would just do a little character monologue every day. And it was fun. I like took the site offline, but I still do like dip back in there sometimes and see these, like, some of them are really weird.
You just make up a character and just do a dialogue in that voice.
Yeah. And so it would be just like different, like I started kind of working with some of the people I worked with, just like kind of extrapolating out from them, but then like doing inanimate objects, animals. And again, that was a skill at some point I had realized in graduate school I just didn't have because I had never acted. I didn't know how to write character stuff. So I started that project out of a reaction to that knowledge that was something I needed to make better.
How long did the Goodman Theater job last for you?
2 years. And it was, I mean, I honestly enjoyed it. It was a great place to work, and you don't need to make a ton of money in Chicago. So
Right.
The nonprofit salary wasn't like prohibitive, and I got to see all the shows they did the whole time, which was great.
But you're still working on developing your skills during that time. Does your comedy career progress at all during that 2 years?
I would say I did, I think 5 different sketch reviews at that time. So some with a group of people I worked with several times, and then one with an older friend of mine who I'd gone to graduate school with, who was at that time and still a much better writer than me. So I felt like he kind of took me under his wing, and we wrote a show together called North Polar Disorder. That was a Christmas show that was at one of the Second City theaters. And I feel like he like kind of educated me through that process again. And that was kind of my first experience of working with someone who was just like much, much better than me, but they treated me like an equal, and I learned a lot.
That's great. So when you do those reviews that aren't a part of like the sketch classes, how does that work? Do you pay for the stage time, or how do you do that?
Yes, you. So Second City actually has, I can't remember the exact numbers, but a pretty good split. You don't pay any money up front. It's all a door split.
Okay.
And we did end up making money. We ended up making about $500, which is pretty good, especially because I aired at midnight.
Most of them do, yeah.
And so they give you, you can use one of their tech people. You have to pay them, but they provide like a trained tech person. You can use their rehearsal spaces. So it's very much like a professional process, which I thought was good for me at that point too, to like work inside a professional theater and feel like I was taking myself seriously.
Then what's the next step up or the next quantum leap that you experience from that point?
So next I got married, and my husband is a physicist, so he got hired. The classic physicist comedy writer pairing.
Classic.
Classic. He got a job working at Intel in Portland, Oregon, and he had just finished his PhD, so he hadn't really worked a job yet outside of the academic environment. So we really felt like he needed to get some experience. And at that time, I know now Portland is very expensive, but at that time it was cheaper than Chicago. This was 2012, so it's only been 6 years. So we moved out there, and I was able to start working freelance, and I started to work as a college professor at that point because I had my MFA. Great.
And you're just teaching writing, or are you teaching comedy writing?
I taught a comedy and satire class.
Great. Okay.
So that's kind of when I got into satire. It was a school called Pacific Northwest College of Art, so they were artists, like visual artists, and film, painting, sculpture. So they thought it would be valuable for the students to learn about the history of satire and like point of view and different comedic ways of looking at the world. So I had to write a whole college class.
Wow.
And that's when I got into satire.
So you're teaching it, but are you writing it? Did you recognize that satire was something that you had been writing also?
I recognized my sketches had been satirical. Like, I don't know that I would have like called them that at the time, but they always had something they were kind of targeting. Because I had been like I still am in some ways. So I'd always been kind of an angry person who had a lot to say. There were a lot of hypocrites in the world.
Most satirists feel the same.
Yeah. So when I started to, organize the materials for this class and get really into the history of satire, that's when I had read McSweeney's my whole life, but that's when I started to be like, I want to get a piece on McSweeney's, and kind of set like my next goal. And then like short written satirical humor and satire pieces became like the thing I wanted to get good at. And it took a few years.
Yeah. So I want to hear about that. But first, how do you define satire?
Well, a few ways. The definition I use when I teach it is satire is the comedy of outrage. It's using humor or wit to attack a target, which can be a person or an institution, and it has something to say. So that's kind of like the basic definition. Then like later on I add like it can cut through the bullshit. It's meant to call out hypocrisy. But I think calling it the comedy of outrage lets students start off by connecting to a strong feeling they hold personally, because sometimes they'll just be like, I'm going to write about Walmart, and then they have no thoughts or feelings on it. So I like to start by being like, it has to come from you.
Yeah, some strong opinion.
Yes.
That they have about something.
Yeah.
An outrage.
Yeah, that you hold to be wrong about the world.
Right. That's great. It's a good definition. All right. So then tell us how that evolves, the teaching position in Portland.
So I'm just in Portland, don't know anyone. And I just start, and this is something I got good at when I worked at the Goodman, just like cold emailing and cold calling people and saying, I want to know things that you know. So a friend of mine said, I know Bill Oakley, who is a former showrunner of The Simpsons, and he lived in Portland. And he said, he'll talk with you on the phone just about comedy. And he did. And we talked on the phone for about an hour. And he kind of gave me a roadmap for what I should do for the next few years. He said, get published in McSweeney's, get published in The New Yorker. There's a radio show in Portland called Livewire. You should try to write for them. And you should be trying to publish these pieces on the internet all the time.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, he gave me like straight up action steps and I executed them.
That's so great. It sounds like you've had a couple of really good mentorship experiences with him and then your writing partner in
Eric.
Chicago. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it just sometimes you just need someone to tell, instead of just like kind of wishy-washy advice, you need someone to be like, hey, next step for you is this, do it. Yep. And so he and I just talked on the phone. We've met a couple times since then. And at that time I was still teaching, and I really liked the school. So I was teaching that comedy and satire class, and I taught other classes, one on dystopian fiction, which was really fun.
Great.
So I was kind of developing my academic career in tandem with like all this freelance writing I was doing.
So this is all non-comedy writing that you're doing, either paid or non-paid through Second City or just submitting stuff. Mm-hmm. You're not really making money, but it's a sideline. It's a hobby.
Yes. And the one thing I was making money from is when I had taught briefly at Second City. When I left, I had just, again, with my cold emailed the head of the training center and been like, I want to teach here. And so he had asked me to develop a class called Story for TV and Film, which is something I had studied, and I had written a screenplay that had been optioned. And so I wrote a class for their training center. And then when I moved to Portland in 2012, they were just starting to explore online classes. So they had me bring the class online, and that became one of their first online classes that wasn't sketch. And
you were able to do that from Portland?
From Portland. And then over the next couple years, I wrote the entire satire track for them. So it took 2.5 years to write all 3 levels, but I just kind of kept adding to it, like with stuff from the college classes and stuff I was learning as I got better at it. And by the time the first class went up in 2015, I felt like it was pretty solid.
Great. And you're still doing that?
I'm still doing that, and the program has gotten really big. We have 3 levels. Brooke Preston, one of the other Belladonna editors, now is another teacher in the program. Right. And we're one of the most popular online programs for them. Fantastic.
So that is one way that you've managed to parlay your interest and skill in comedy writing into a paying gig. Mm-hmm. Obviously, is that a full-time gig, writing for or teaching for Second City, when you can do it online and do it as much as you did it and build your own program as opposed to just teaching within their existing program?
It could be. Last year I certainly made like a full-time income from them, even though I also did all other work as well. But yeah, it's steadily grown over the years where I've definitely worked weeks where I've worked 40 hours a week and been paid for 40 hours. But then it's nice because last summer I took 2 months off entirely and went on vacation. So it's an interesting kind of freelance work that can be done anywhere and at really any time.
And so when you start teaching comedy writing, do you find that helps your own comedy writing? Do you get better at it? Or do you find that you're not following your own advice when you're working?
Well, the interesting thing about teaching online is, and the way Second City does it, there are no videos. It's all written. So I had to literally explain how my brain worked when I brainstormed. And And that helped me. That's when I think I became like, I improved 1,000% when I had to actually crystallize why I thought the way I thought and how I had to look at my own pieces. At that point I'd had on McSweeney's and other sites and be like, why did this work and this one didn't? So I kind of had to do like at that point in my career, postmortem on everything I'd written and extrapolate lessons out for that. And so I found that extraordinarily helpful. And then as I've built the later levels, the things I've learned as I've, progressed and gotten bigger publications, I've put in there as well. And yeah, I just feel like as I've learned all these things myself through my very slow method of learning, I've been able to put it in the classes.
So what is that process, if you don't mind walking us through that? Like, how do you brainstorm ideas to write about?
Well, I use some, and you teach for Second City too, so
I do.
You might be familiar with some of the stuff they use, but they talk a lot about clusters and lists of 10.
I don't know anything about
Oh, really? Okay.
No, I mean, I invented my own program. It's the Onion program, and it's separate.
Yeah.
So I don't know any of like the Second City terms or tricks or anything.
Yeah.
Because I never took any of those classes. But so go ahead.
So they're pretty simple. Like, kind of the interesting thing about it is it's a way to explain how you go from kind of broad thinking and loose and pattern association and loose, just like association of ideas and words to something more structured. So you start out with something really broad and you just basically do a word cloud. So if it's, injustice, which obviously is too broad to write about, you would like just pull out like a bunch of things that made you think of, and you get to maybe like the gender pay gap, and you're like, great. And then you do the process again with that, and maybe you come to like, what would it look like, in an office if like everyone's salaries get sent to everyone else? And you're like, well, that's not an idea yet, but that's like something more specific that I can maybe work with and see if there's a form in there. And then you use a list of 10, which is literally what it sounds like, to kind of, and the way I use it is I distill like 10 different titles that piece could have and 10 different forms it could take. So some of them might be like an email exchange, some of them might be a straight list, some of them might be an expanded list, some of them might be like a memo from HR after this happened. And so I come up with 10 different ways I could write the piece, and then from there I select which one is like connecting to me the most. Because that's something I've learned about myself too, is like my first few ideas are bad. They're genuinely not good.
Most of ours are.
Yeah, but I think when you first start writing, there's a tendency to be like, oh, an idea crystallized, and like you want to grab it out of the air and like pin it down and write it right away. But it's like, let that one go. That one's bad.
Typically.
So like number 7 or 8 is usually like, I can work with it.
And then once you start writing, like what's your process for, well, first of all, you don't vet those titles with anyone. You're using your own internal horse sense about which one you like, right?
Yeah, like which ones I can immediately think of jokes on right away.
Okay, so yeah, you use that technique where if you start to see it unfolding in your mind,
yeah,
the story is kind of writing itself already in your mind, then you know that's the one and you go with it.
Yeah, like there are some where the title sounds really good, but then when you sit with it for another 2 minutes, you can't think of a joke or you can't phrase it. So again, I've learned to let those go, because early on in writing, I would be like, well, this is good. Let's spend 6 hours crying about this. So now I just, honestly, if you look at like the New Yorker or some of the McSweeney's pieces that do the best, the titles are incredibly simple. It's a simple concept executed at a very high level. And that's something that took me a while to learn.
Yeah. Is the process similar with the writing of the actual piece, the throwing out the first idea, coming up with a whole bunch of ideas, or how do you go through that?
Yeah,
process?
like if I'm going to ultimately have like 15 things on a list, I'll write like 40 because the first few are bad. And then I think by the end I get almost too absurd or too away from the premise of the piece, so I have to get rid of those. And then once I have that, I feel like this relief that like it's not just going to disappear. It's cemented in some way. And then I'll usually walk away and then come back to it later. And then before I send anything out, I like have an outside reader read it.
Smart.
Yeah.
And do you have a group of people that you go to for that, or do you do it randomly, or is it your mom, or how do you do that?
Well, now I use a lot of the editors of the Belladonna, but
Sure.
My friend Eric, who I talked about earlier, is like my top reader. So the piece I had in the New Yorker, he's the only one I sent it to, because I was like, I need high level Eric notes.
Awesome.
So he's someone that I really trust. But
what is he doing now, by the way?
He is his name is Eric Gernon. He's a great playwright. He's had plays produced all over the country. He's written a bunch of screenplays. He's in talks with a bunch of different production companies. He's also a lecturer at Northwestern too.
Okay.
So
and
yeah,
he teaches writing. or
He
comedy?
teaches writing and film production.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah, he's a great dude.
So he's one of your people that you would send something to.
And then the Belladonna editors, and then my youngest sister, Grace, because she works in tech sales and is not a comedy person, but she watches every late night show every night.
So she's like your common person viewpoint.
Yes, like, does this make sense?
Right.
And she'll, like, the granular things, like, she's like, the wording of this makes no sense. I had to read it 5 times. And again, like that, like, good, like, concise sister feedback, or she's like, this is bad.
That's great. Yeah, getting somebody to give you honest feedback like that is really difficult and critical, especially somebody who's like a normal person who's not in comedy.
Yes, because comedy people, I mean, I know my own taste, and it can be very dark, and in some ways almost too dark for some publications. And if you ask another person like that, they're going to skew you in the wrong direction. But when you ask someone who you know loves Jimmy Fallon and watches Colbert every night and like probably listens to 50 monologue jokes a day, then she's really great for being like, I don't know anything about that story. You're like, okay, cool.
That's really valuable. Do you have like a process or habits that you've made a part of your life to incorporate writing or any other things having to do with writing that you think really help you?
I think one thing is I'm an introvert, and I know a lot of comedy people are, but sometimes it feels like you're swimming in like a mess of extroverts trying to make things happen.
Yes.
But one place I feel really secure is over email. I know I can write a real good email. So something I do every Monday morning from 10 to 11 is I just send out cold emails, kind of like related to career opportunities. I contact places looking to teach workshops or classes. I reach out to authors I know and just say I really like their work, which I think people think is creepy, but it's not when you're not asking for anything.
Oh, it's a great way to find mentors, right?
Yeah. And just like, I mean, I've emailed people who I read their novel, and I would just find their author email and say, you know, this novel really resonated with me for this reason. And I've read your work for years, and I just wanted to tell you. And then you get these beautiful emails back from people you really admire. And again, like, don't creepily then ask for a favor, but like, I've done this for years, and now some of these people, are friends of mine. So
that's so great. I think you sent me one of those, not a glowing like email full of praise, but more like reaching out maybe during your Monday morning cold email period,
probably
asking me to be interviewed by you for your class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I interviewed you for the second level of the satire class. So now all the students read that interview with you.
Right.
But yeah, that's like exactly the type of thing I would do. I'd be like, who would be of value to the students who I also want to talk to because I think they're interesting, and I would have a list of names and then email 10 to 11.
Yeah, and I'm sure you found this, but it's surprising for people who don't do it how receptive people are when you're not asking for anything. You're just emailing to say that you appreciate their work, or maybe you just want some advice for your own career. Like, people love giving out advice, right?
And it, like, again, like, it's so easy to be respectful, like, and don't immediately follow up with like asking for notes. But like, yeah, if you're like, look, I answer people all the time who say things like, you know, I live outside of New York or LA. I'm not sure what the next step is. And like I was saying earlier, I so appreciated when Bill Oakley just like kind of gave me a whole plan that I'll say like, okay, great. Make some goal sites you want to submit to, you know, here are some classes you can take if you want. Here are I have like a list now of different pieces with advice that I sent back to them, and it's like a little FAQ, and there's no reason not to send that to someone. Yeah.
And you don't want to ask for notes because that is a big ask to like, hey, can you read my screenplay, or can you read all these multi-pages of jokes? Like, that's a lot of time you're asking for someone.
Yeah. And a lot of mental energy. Like for me, this energy it takes for me to write is the same energy to give feedback. So you've basically said like, can you not write today and do this free thing for me? Which even though people don't, I think, understand it's a big deal. So you don't want to be mean in your email back.
That's another big thing. You can't be mean.
Yeah.
Like if you've gotten to a certain level, you have to be really gracious and nice, and part of the price you pay for getting there. So what do you have any other like daily habits? Like, do you write a certain amount or try to, or do you do that at a certain time, or any kind of like rituals that you have?
I don't write every day, and I know a lot of people do. But I do keep a lot of notes. So I bookmark a lot of articles that were interesting, and then I will take some time to kind of go through why. I have a running list of things I want to write about. And then the other thing I do that like changed my writing, and now I recommend to all my students, is I just have a Google Doc that's just full of forms that pieces could take. So like diary entries, recipes, but like any form, commencement speeches, retirement speeches, email exchanges, software updates. And
Right.
sometimes when you want to write topical, so you want to write something really, really fast, if you read a news story, and I remember when Anthony Scaramucci got fired in July from the White House, I looked in my little document and I was like, oh, exit interview, cool. So I wrote a piece called like the Mooch's exit interview from the White House, and like wrote it within like 40 minutes and put it up on the Belladonna. And people were like, how could you do that so fast? And it's just like, if you have the form of the piece, you just need like the specific jokes.
What is your plan now, or do you have no plan still? Or have your goals escalated much like your skills? Like at the point where you decided, I really want to get published in McSweeney's back in Portland, and then you achieved that, and then all these other things that you wanted to do, you're achieving, and you're making a living doing comedy now. You have a book deal. Does that mean your goals are now bigger and more specific, or do you sort of feel like you've made it?
I would have to say, like, I still don't know what the goals are.
Okay.
Again, like, it's when the book deal appeared to us, all of us, we range in age from late 20s to late 40s. We've been professionals a long time, so we could hop on it right away and make it happen and execute a book proposal in 2 weeks. And now we're getting inquiries about the site, like people from big media companies who read the Belladonna are interested in collaborating with us.
Great.
Not something I would have thought of when we started the site, but we've, set it up so that we were able to do that. And that's something we can work with. So yeah, I mean, publishing a book has been a goal of mine since I was a little kid and wrote about puppies all the time. So that will be great. But then I guess I'll just be waiting for the next thing to come around.
Yeah, maybe it'll be a book about puppies.
Wow, full circle.
All right, well, thanks for your time today, Caitlin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the How to Write Funny podcast. This is a free podcast, so please help us out by leaving a review on iTunes. It's the neighborly thing to do.